morning. The myth I'd like to address right now is the idea that spiritual development brings you into the fifth dimension. And this is an idea that I've heard. It's probably just a new age thing of moving into the fifth dimension and 5D living and so on and so on. And if you're not familiar, it's characterized by saying, well, three-dimensional living, which is where the judgment is that most people is fear-based and control and all that. And then 5D living is moving into love and abundance and whatever. Well, it's a myth, and I think it's a cute myth, and it sounds nice up front. One of the huge problems with it, and why that idea is toxic, though, is that the idea that you move into a vibrational space that is only love and abundance, one, it denies your full range of human experience, which is more than just love and abundance. It is perfectly allowable to have emotions that some people think are negative. And this idea of moving into 5D has the potential to make people feel guilty or ashamed of being a complete and total human, having a full spectrum of emotions. So, do I think love and abundance are great? Yeah, of course I do. But I also think that being accepting of yourself and other people, to not judge people for being human in any way that you deem as less than a certain dimensional character, or whatever nonsense that is. But then I really started to think about it, and Rupert Spira sent me down this rabbit hole with what are these dimensions. And so if we have 4 standard dimensions, 3 in physical space and then 1 in time, what is that 5th dimension? What actually is that? And so Rupert Spira, he went into this a little bit, saying that the mind, the structure of the human mind, is in 4 dimensions, typically. And so that's why we experience reality in 4 dimensions. In the same way, we have the faculties of sight and smell and hearing and touch and taste. And as he says, lo and behold, how do we describe the world in terms of sights and sounds and touch and taste and smell? Like, it's not a coincidence. We define the world by our ability to perceive it. So that's easy. Now, it would be impossible for someone with a, let's say, 4-dimensional mind to experience a 7-dimensional reality. And I thought, wow, how is that? Is that really true? And let me step back a second. It's my belief and understanding that the only reason why the human mind is structured with a 4-dimensional perception is simply because that's the way we're taught. There's no inherent reason why the mind has to be that way. We're taught that you can move through 3-dimensional space, and then time exists, and also we're convinced that time only moves in one direction. So you're just taught that structure is imprinted on your mind from birth until present. That they're it's not inherent to the mind. It's an imprint. So now going back to what these dimensions might be, I had a dream where all this was made clear to me. And what's super interesting about that, and what makes it kind of obvious, is that in the dream space, we are unburdened by a lot of these cultural and societal structures and imprints. And so in the dream space, I was able to see how these other higher dimensions are existing, and then I'm going to make an attempt to bring them back and explain them. So we assume that in 3 dimensions, all adjacent positions are equally distant from each other, meaning I can take the 1 step to the left and 1 step to the right, go up 1 foot, or that I can move in equal space in all dimensions. What we don't allow ourselves to understand because of these imprints is that, in fact, it's the same distance if I move 1 foot to the left or 100 miles to the left. Now, I know that doesn't, okay, so the reason why it's the same distance, it comes from a completely different shift in perception. And for example, the idea that 1 step to the left and 1,000,000 miles to the left are different distances is assuming that there is a reference plane outside of myself by which the measurement is taken. But that's not really true. There's no actual truth to the exterior, absolute, objective reference point, because where I'm sitting right now is here, and if I go 1 step to the left, where am I? I'm not 1 step to the left, I'm still here. If I go 1,000 miles to my left, I'm not 1,000 miles to my left now, I'm still here. So when you realize that you are always, inevitably, unquestionably at the 0 point, at the origin, then every single other place, if you could even that then becomes like an illusory concept. There is no other place, there's only here. So here only has the same distance, which is 0, to every other place that you could be. And I know this concept, it kind of seems a little convoluted, but let me see if I can give another example to maybe make it make more sense. If I look across the room at that table, I have one perspective of reality. And then without shifting my physical position, I look over here at my didgeridoo, and now I have a different perspective of reality. But where did I go? I didn't go anywhere. I just changed the angle of perception. Or even more so, if I look at my hand, let's bring my hand into the frame. I'm looking at my fingers, my whole hand, and then I'm just looking at the crease in my middle finger. Where did I go? I didn't even change angle, I changed focus. So I'm only using those as examples to kind of illustrate that because you are always at one single eternal point that you cannot leave, what you're really doing is adjusting, shifting, changing your focus or angle, however you want to think about it. You're not actually going anywhere. And because you're not actually going anywhere, all perception vantage points are equally distant from you in that sense of all being 0. And this is much more accessible in the dream state because we are unbound. So right now, if I want to go across the room, I'm not making any kind of ridiculous claim that I can just skip the intermediate space between here and across the room. Now, I'll get to that in a second. But in the dream space, that's very easy. It's very easy to teleport. it's very easy to time travel. You do it just by moving your mind there because you're not burdened by the physical body. And so now getting back to the dimensional conversation, if you have 3 physical dimensions and all of them are assumed to have adjacent spaces that you can move into, but then you realize actually it's not that there are only adjacent spaces that you can move into, but every assumed space in any direction is actually the same distance from the center point that you're moving from. You've just gone from 3 physical dimensions to 6. Okay, and what about time? Well, there's no reason at all to assume that time is different. If time moves moment to moment to moment, which again is not actually true, but in this concept of being in dimensional reality, then why would you have to move 1 moment ahead versus 1,000 years ahead? There's no reason from this perspective that you would be confined in that shifting of perspective, and also, going backwards. Now, so now we're actually 2 folded dimensions of time and 6 folded dimensions of space. And I'm saying folded only because they have a certain similarity. I'm creating like in this menagerie of dimensions, the 2 times are like a subset, and then there's another thing. I was thinking, well, are there more dimensions? What else do we perceive? Because everything that we're talking about in terms of the dimensions and how we're shifting perspective and angle and focus, the whole point of it is from this center point of here now, we are becoming aware of new information. And so I thought, well, what other information do I know is available and yet is typically disregarded or unacknowledged? And the 2 obvious things are thoughts and emotions. And I wouldn't necessarily say that our own thoughts and emotions are part of that, but I guess I don't know why they would be excluded. But they're so obvious to us that we feel our thoughts and emotions. But what we don't typically acknowledge is the ability to feel in an empathetic sense and to know in a telepathic sense what other people are thinking and feeling. And those I would put into another subset. Because the thoughts and the feelings that people have, which are literally vibrational in the body. You have a thought, it creates a electrical current in your brain, and it's a spider web of neural connections, and as we know from physics, all electrical movement causes magnetic field changes. And so it makes perfect sense to me that when someone has a thought, and especially if it's a very powerful thought that consumes a lot of brain power, it shifts the magnetic field that's always existing around your body, especially your head, or in your heart. If you're having something going on with your heart has a magnetic field to it. It has electrical pulses. It's your heartbeat. How do you think the heart beats? So this pulsing happens, and it sends out, or it maintains rather, a field around you that when it shifts, that shift in the field can be interpreted because it will have a consistent way of being, such that when it's perfectly content and at rest, the field looks one way, and then when it's disturbed, it looks another way. And with more and more training, you can determine the nature of the disturbance to figure out if it's like elation and joy, or if it's depressed, sad, angry, resentful, whatever. So when we've now combined the three standard dimensions in time, but then realizing that all the spaces are folded into each other. Okay, now we have, so there's 3 plus 1, now it's 6 plus 1, but then the time is the same, so that's 6 plus 2. Then the thoughts and emotions, which are very similar, intimately connected, and then that's another 2, so that's 10. So now up to 10 dimensions. So the idea that 5D living is superior to 3D living, from considering everything I've said, it just seems a little bit silly to me, honestly. We are all simultaneously existing in all dimensions. Now, whether or not you use them actively in your waking life or aware, that's your business. But when you're dreaming, you are 100% completely involved in all those dimensions. You do time travel in your sleep. You do jump or teleport in your sleep. All these things, mind reading is simple because there's not the idea imprinted on your conscious mind to tell you that it's not allowed. So the idea that living in a higher dimensional reality, like being in 5D living, is just some kind of new age delusional nonsense that really has no bearing on what these dimensions really are. So that myth I'm considering busted. I was gonna circle back to something, and now I forget what it is. Let me check. I remembered. So I was mentioning that I couldn't skip the space between here and the other side of the room, even though I know that it's actually the same distance from the perspective that there is no distance there. And in a functional sense of living in the physical world, that it doesn't really make sense to implement that knowledge. Now, the interesting thing about that is that while I have not personally been able to teleport my physical body, I can see remotely, and I can dream remotely, and I can move in that space without my body, but I've never been able to move my body through space, through this other dimension that I'm talking about. However, I have witnessed it. It absolutely blew my mind when I saw it. I discussed the whole story in my book, but it's definitely real. I'm still not sure how it works, but I've witnessed it. I know it's real, and I think at some point I will figure out how to do that, or the knowledge will come to me as most likely as a form of remembering, because it seems like everything comes that way. But yeah, I guess the point of all that is just to say that even though most people move through reality in physically adjacent steps, that's, in my opinion, only because we assume that's how we can do it because of this imprinted structure. When we realize that we are not bound by that, then teleporting, reading people's memories, thoughts, emotions, and gliding through back and forth through time will be trivial. It'll be as trivial as standing up and going to the refrigerator. And that opens up a whole lot of other really interesting thoughts about if you can move back and forth through all time and space, thoughts and emotions very smoothly and at will, what would actually be interesting to you at that time? I mean, that itself might be interesting to play with, but you get bored of it, especially when time is infinite or eternal. Then what would you do with your time? Or, well, you get it.